pretty good, I imagine. You know, probably, I'm sure it was certainly not below average life expectancy. So he passed away at 65 years old. 9 years before he passed away, there was the first crusade in the year 1096. In the year 1096. During the first crusade, those three cities of Speyer, Mainz, and Worms, those three cities were basically, the inhabitants of those cities were pillaged. They were given three options. Either you could, what do you call it? They were called the carriers of the sword. Godfried. Godfried and his army. This is well-known history. They came and they said, either you convert to, it was Christianity at the time, or, we've been very democratic about it, either you convert or you die. It's called democracy. Okay, we give you the choices. Right? Either you convert or you die. That was what the option. Many people would not convert to Christianity. And there are really serious questions of the day. For example, some people gave up their own lives and took their kids' lives rather than, they didn't want their kids to grow up not Jewish. And it was all very complicated, terrible. I mean, you didn't want to live at that time, that I promise you, in those cities. But there were many Jews that did convert to Christianity. I forget who it was, Benedict. There was one of the leaders that when he came back and restored order, he allowed the Jews to return to their initial religion if they wanted to, and all the Jews that converted returned to their original religion. In any event, I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but Rashi wrote about the pain. We read it on Yom Kippur, actually. Probably most people don't know. He wrote, Tanot tzarot lo nuchal. The extent of our tzarot, of our troubles, we cannot bear. He wrote, after it speaks about the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, and Mishacharav Beit Mikdashenu, and after Beit HaMikdash, he writes the tremendous tzarot, the tremendous troubles that happened to the Jewish people. And of course, he was very torn up. And he wrote that part that we include in the Yom Kippur, in Musaf, in the liturgy, in the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, and the Yom Kippur liturgy, that actually originates from what Rashi himself wrote. And there's other lamentations that he himself wrote on these terrible crusades. Rashi, the Jewish people were clearly, cut up and in tatters about this whole thing. But there was an interesting problem that happened as a consequence. Those people that converted to Christianity rather than giving up their lives and came back, they had a very difficult time. They were shunned. Right? The local Christian population, because they had gone back to Judaism, didn't want to accept them, and the Jews didn't want to accept them. They said, you sold out. You should have given up your life. And Rashi writes there that that's a terrible thing, and he writes that they should not be shunned. They did it under force, under the sword. How could we shun them? And people were saying you should marry them. And Rashi said no. They did it under force, and we have to accept them and welcome them back in. By the way, Maimonides writes the same thing later, but in Maimonides' time, Islam was trampling through Europe, and it was also convert or die. And many Jews converted to Islam under duress. Right? Still till today, you have the Marranos and the remnants of the Marranos, etc., etc.
When we
was Catholic.
What's that?
Marranos were Catholic, not Islam.
Yeah, that was. But before that, you had absolutely the Marranos were converted they kept Christianity private. But that's before even the Marranos. In the Rambam's time, it was the threat was Islam. Yeah.
When we talked about the Rambam,
yes,
and we were talking about how many people of the time,
yes,
were faced with the question of either converting or dying.
Yes.
So I remember we spoke about that many people came to the Rambam and said, what should we do?
Yes.
And that the Rambam said that when you live in a place where you can't practice your religion, you should leave and go someplace else.
Correct.
So, and that's what he did. He went someplace else. So I imagine that probably that was his instruction to the people, and therefore, that a lot of people would convert. I mean, I can understand why people would convert, under danger of death, But
Look, in the first instance, what the Rambam was saying that the most important thing a person has is their religious freedom. The Rambam says if you're living in a place where you can't express your religious freedom, you need to leave. So he advised people living in those circumstances to leave. And there's no question, but listen, you living in those neighborhoods, I don't think people saw it coming like this. You never see it coming. Even when they told Jews in certain parts of Europe what was going on, they didn't believe it. They told the Jews in Hungary what was going on in other parts of Europe before it hit Hungary. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't get their mind. They couldn't get their mind around, and that's going to hit me. You're right, but it's not so. I don't know. But the problem is that they hadn't left, and if you have, so. They were. What I'm trying to. The main point I'm trying to say is that Rashi was saying that it's not in accordance with the Jewish religion to shun people that don't keep their religious practices under the threat of life and death. Whether you should or shouldn't or give up your life is one question, but once you've done it, so Rashi advocated that people should integrate the people back and be compassionate towards them. Okay. I'm going to come back to this in a moment. I have over here a page of the Talmud. Okay. So I wanted to just show you, just for the purpose of completion. You have in the Talmud, you have Rashi's commentary throughout on the side of the Talmud, and every page of the Talmud is the same. So like here, Rashi says there's a word that's used, hameduvlelet, that's used in the Mishnah. What is hameduvlelet? No one knows. So Rashi says, don't worry. He's helping you learn. Don't worry. Later on in the Talmud, it's going to explain what it means. See, because you're learning it, you come across the word meduvlelet. So what do? You give up. Well, I don't give up. Well, I'm going to read further. I don't know the third word of the Mishnah. The second word of the Mishnah, I don't know what it means. So Rashi says, hold on. It's going to explain so a little bit in the Gemara a little bit later on. So Rashi, he really comes to guard one through the study of Talmud. This is a random example I picked, by the way. It was the clearest example I could copy of the internet. Right? And that's the first thing that Rashi says. Have a look later on. So he's really a teacher and a guard, and therefore I believe that as the reason why Judaism is so strong today, and that so many people have access, and so many people that can learn, and even beginners, is because of Rashi.
But can you explain how it works? Like the middle is the Talmud,
Yes.
around is the Rashi.
So usually on a page of the Talmud, the middle is you have the Mishnah and then the Gemara that makes up the Talmud. Then on the inside of the page by the binding, that's how most of them are printed, you have Rashi. And on the outside you have a commentary called Tosfot, which I'm going to explain about in a moment. Okay? But Rashi, learning the Talmud with Rashi is like bread and butter. That's like basic learning. Okay? I'm going to speak about the Tosfot in a moment.